Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this public meeting concerning our development charges background study. I want to remind you that members of the public are always encouraged to provide counsel with their comments and questions. If a member of the public wishes to participate, they may do so either in person at the council chambers or remotely via Zoom, phone, or internet. Members of the public wishing to make a deputation or to ask a public question must register in advance with Legislative Services, and you do that by noon on the day of by contacting the Deputy Clerk at meaford.ca. Phone number is 519-538-1060, extension 1110. An email with access information will be sent to those who register for remote participation. And a reminder, the public can watch this meeting live via the Municipality of Meaford's YouTube channel, www.meaford.ca/YouTube. So we'll begin today with our land acknowledgement, and I'm going to call on Councillor Greenfield to read it for us.
Thank you, Mayor Ross. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation. We also recognize the Métis, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. We extend our gratitude to all Anishinaabe and Métis people and their descendants, past, present, and future, who continue to care for and inhabit these lands and tend to these waters.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll just ask you to join me in a moment of silent reflection on today's business. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest before we get started? Seeing none, just a reminder that if it occurs to you, bring it forward at that time. And now I need a motion to move into committee of the whole. I'm a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Urick and seconded by Deputy Mayor Keaveney. All in favor? And I think we're going to begin, if we may, by calling our guest to the microphone there to just give us a rundown on the background study that we're talking about in the program today.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the public, it's a pleasure to be here this evening. This is the formal public meeting as is required under the Development Charges Act, and due and proper notice of the meeting was given, and the background study and the bylaw has been released in accordance with the provisions of the legislation. What I'd like to do over the next 10 or 15 minutes is just to provide you with an overview of the development charge background study, talk about the forecasts that we've used, how much is going to develop in the town over the next 10 years. I'm going to provide a very high-level summary of the growth-related capital program and move quickly into looking at the detailed rates and comparing those with your current charges and charges elsewhere in surrounding areas. There's a significant amount of detail in the background study itself, which illustration shows how the rates have been calculated. As I indicated, the purpose of the meeting here is just to provide general information to council and mainly to the public about what the development charges are and what they're used to fund and the rates that we've determined. As I indicated, it's a statutory public meeting. The bylaw has been made available, the draft proposed bylaw. And one other thing I would like to note is that we will be back to council in October with the bylaw. Once it appeal is in place, it can be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal for a period of 40 days following the passage of the bylaw. So it's important that the background study be done in accordance with the legislation and is defensible and reasonable. Some may ask, what are development charges? Because I jumped right in here. Really, this is the prime funding tool made available to Ontario municipalities to fund what we refer to as growth or development related capital costs. And it's the first round of capital costs associated with meeting the increased needs arising from development. In a very simple sense, it says that as the municipality grows, as more residential units are constructed, as more non-residential space is created, the people that live in those dwelling units or work in those places place an increased demand on municipal services. They will require road infrastructure, water and sewer services, and the municipality needs to expand its infrastructure to accommodate those needs. This tool allows us to fund a share of that cost through development charge fees, which are levied against the development of those buildings at the time the issuance of the building permit. The concept or the mantra of the municipalities is often that growth should pay for growth and shouldn't place an undue burden upon existing ratepayers and taxpayers. Because if this tool isn't used and those costs aren't borne from development charges, the works are still going to be required and they would have to be funded from property taxes or your utility rates. This schematic is a high-level overview of the process that we go through, and it's done in accordance with the Development Charges Act itself. Basically, what we do is we say, how much is the municipality going to grow by over our planning horizon? And we're looking at a 10-year period now, 2024 to 2033. And then we say, how many people are going to be added to the community? What are the new dwelling units that are going to be necessary to house those people? How many new employees will be working within the geographic area of the municipality? And how much space will they need to be accommodated? And then we work with the municipality, with the staff, and with the documents that you've done, like your capital budget, your master servicing plans and alike, and say, what do we need to do to meet the increased needs arising from that growth? What is the capital need? We then have to go through a process and say there's certain limitations under the Development Charges Act itself. One of the key ones is that we can't set development charge rates at a level greater than the way that the municipality has provided the service on average over the last 15 years. So for each and every service, we go back 15 years and we examine it. We say, how much library space did the municipality have? How many books did it have? How much land were those libraries sitting on? And we calculate a service level. That places a cap or a restriction on how high the development charges can be set. So we can't ask new to growth to pay for services at a higher level than the way you've provided them in the past. We also have to recognize if you're going to receive any grants or subsidies or anticipate receiving them, we net those off. And we also identify if a share of the works is going to benefit existing residents, and we remove that. What we're left with is the share of the capital program that is, one, related to the development, and two, is eligible for funding under the Development Charges Act. We allocate benefit to residential growth, non-residential growth, and then calculate the development charge rates that we're going to get to in a few minutes. So I talked a little bit just about the legislation itself. Many of you will be aware, and we've talked about this at the previous session with yourselves and at the information sessions, the Development Charge Act has changed significantly over the last few years. And the most recent changes, sort of Bill 185, changed some of the things back again to what they were. Most significantly is that there used to be a mandatory, introduced by Bill 20, a mandatory phase-in or discounting of new rates when a new bylaw is passed. That has now been removed. So the fully calculated rates can go into force immediately on the effective date of the bylaw. However, there are other things that have remained. There is an exemption for affordable housing. There's discounts for certain types of residential buildings, and there's exemptions for nonprofit housing and other activities as well. Those remain in place. And it's all about trying to achieve the housing that we're looking to add throughout the province. So just quickly to move into the development forecast itself. Appendix A of the background study contains significant amount of detail of the forecast. It's largely based upon the growth management work done at the county level. However, we also recognize that the municipality has received a significant amount of development application, and there's a fairly significant amount of development planned and occurring within the municipality. So we've reflected that in the forecast, and we have a slightly faster rate of development than might be seen in the county's plan, just to reflect what's going on and the infrastructure needs that are arising from that. As I said, we're looking at a 10-year period of 2024 to 2033, and we forecasted out residential dwelling units, population, employment, and the space that would be necessary to accommodate them. We are estimating that over the next 10 years, you're going to add about 635 new dwelling units. And you'll be at just about 5,800 dwelling units at that point. We did receive some feedback through the information sessions that perhaps that's being a little bit cautious and that there could be more development occurring. We see that through the potential and the plans that you have before, but we're trying to be somewhat cautious and not create an over expectation about how much monies might be raised. It's important to note that we've made a direct relationship between the servicing needs of those units, so that if you had twice as many units, or 1,000 or 1,200, we would need twice as much capital works to meet the servicing needs arising from that, and the rates would be largely the same as what we've calculated in the background study. In terms of population, we're estimating that you're going to grow by just about 1,100 persons, reaching a population of about 12,800 by 2033. There's this other notion about the population within the new dwelling units that's going to be added. They're actually going to be higher at almost 1,500 persons. And what that means is, and this is based on data specific to Meaford, but it's consistent across the province, is that people, when new housing units are created, they're often purchased by couples in their family forming years. And so they buy it as a couple and then they have a child or they have two children, and units typically reach their peak occupancy within the first 10 years of being constructed. Meanwhile, older houses start to see a decline in their occupancy as kids move away from home, or hopefully eventually, and as families change over time. What this means is if there were no new dwelling units added in Meaford, your population would actually decline. But because we're adding dwelling units, your population is going to increase. This is an important consideration when we calculate development charge rates, because the capacity created by the decline in that population is attributed to new development, and it places a downward pressure on the rates. That's a bit of the inside of the ballpark, but I just wanted to explain why I've got two different numbers there up on the chart. Non-residentially, we're estimating you're going to add about 946 new employees, and they will be accommodated in about 65,000 square meters of new non-residential space. If you prefer the old imperial system, you multiply that by roughly 10, just over 10. So we're looking at about 650,000 square feet of new non-residential space, everything from retail, commercial, and industrial or manufacturing kinds of activities. So then what we've done is said, okay, we've got this amount of development occurring. What are the various capital budgeting exercises that you've done, the master servicing plans? What are the secondary plan studying or the development applications saying the needs are arising from that development? And we've set those out, and appendices of the background study provide details on each of the numbers I'm about to show you, with very specific projects and the allocations of benefit. The next slide here just provides a summary of the capital program for what I'll call the general services. That includes library, fire protection, parks and recreation, services related to a highway, but the public works component, that's like your depot and your storage for buildings and your fleet, and then development related studies, which are also eligible. I'll use library as an example. So the capital program there is some $1.8 million, largely related to the existing debt on the expansion of your library, because it was oversized to accommodate growth out over a longer period of horizon. Benefit to existing shares says there's a little bit of work here that relates to addressing existing needs, largely related to collection materials. So we've removed the $50,000. There's no available development charge reserve fund for library services, so there's no adjustment there. And then we have a column other development related, which is really where we're saying we're exceeding the service level. And so we can't recover all of that cost. And the portion that we've included in the rates is some $655 million. And that's true for all of the different services there. And you can see in total, we have a capital program for this services of about $15.4 million, of which $4,284,000 we have said is related to the development, and we've included in our rate calculations. And you can see the single largest component on these services is the parks and recreation at about $2.4 million for recovery. But really, Meaford's development charges are driven by your engineering services and the significant infrastructure needs that you have there and the significant costs that are going to be incurred for your roads, for your water systems, for the sewage treatment expansion, for stormwater needs. And the totality of that capital program is some $116 million, a very large number. But we recognize that some of this infrastructure is going to service growth much beyond 2033. And so you can see there's some benefit to existing of about $15.5 million. The importance for council of knowing that number is that's the cost that's going to have to be funded from either your tax base for the roads and related, and then on the water and wastewater side, that'll have an impact on your utility rates. We do have a bit of development charge reserve fund monies that we've applied. And then we've made an allocation of a significant amount of benefit of these works to growth beyond 2033, because those expansion needs, the capacity, are going to meet growth needs beyond that. So the share that is related to development over the next 10 years is some 33,142,000. Lots of numbers for you today. I'm going to get straight into the rates now. So the next slide just provides us with a summary of the rates and for residential. And what we do is we calculate a charge per capita. And you can see that the total charge per capita is 17,141. And then the charge for a single or semi-detached unit, and in Meaford, the average occupancy of a newly constructed single detached unit is 2.63 persons. The 2.63 times the 17,000 yields that charge of just over 45,000 a unit. A couple of things I want to note is that if you're living in the more rural parts of the municipality and developing there, and you're not on municipal water, wastewater, you would pay that lower charge of 15,923. If you're in the serviced area of the municipality is when you pay the water and the wastewater services to get to the 45,000 a unit. We then have a charge for other residential dwelling unit types, rows and multiples, and if there were apartments, and a PPU of 1.5. So that charge would be 25,700. We also added in a nursing home charge on a per bed basis. I think it was there before, based on one person per bed. And that charge would be the 17,141. And then non-residentially, we calculate a charge on a per square meter basis, and we differentiate between industrial uses and other non-residential uses, largely your commercial retail activities. That charge would be $287.24 per square meter of gross floor area, building space. The industrial charge is being calculated at just over $150 a square meter. I'm sure you're interested to understand and see how do these newly calculated charges compare with those that the municipality has charged in the past. So the current full charge for all the services, and some of them aren't being levied at the moment, would be $22,632. So the new charge at $45,000 a unit is about a doubling of the charge. And you can see that it's really being driven by some key services, the roads and related infrastructure, the water system, and the sewer system. The sewer system obviously being about the treatment plant. And for the treatment plant itself, it's important to recognize we've made an assumption of a 30% grant on the expansion of the plant, even though that has not been completely solidified as of yet. And we've also recognized there's going to create capacity for growth well beyond 2033. And then the water system is about needing additional reservoir storage capacity. And then the road network is needing some work as well. So those are all the things that are really contributing to that rate increase. And I would note, as I've said in our previous session and at the information sessions, the capital project list is largely unchanged from previous studies. And I've had the pleasure of working with Meaford for about 15 years. We have not undertaken a fulsome review of the cost of delivering those projects for the last decade. And so this was the first opportunity where we've looked at it, where we've had tender prices coming in, either here or in adjacent municipalities for like the sewage treatment plant. And so it's reflecting the fact that there's been significant cost pressures experienced by all municipalities across the province, and I would say across the country. Non-residentially, the charges are increasing somewhat less than double of the current charges. This is the commercial charge, which would increase by about $134 a square meter, and the industrial charge would increase by about almost $70 a square meter. We also often get asked to provide comparisons with other jurisdictions. I'm always somewhat cautious about doing this because it's done at a point in time. Some of these other jurisdictions will be doing updates sometime in the next year or two. Some will have already done them, some may be phasing in, and also they need to be reflective of the services and the service levels provided in each of those municipalities. This is a residential comparisons of other surrounding municipalities, and I've also included some municipalities in Simcoe County. You can see on this comparator list, you were sort of at the bottom of the middle portion of this group, and you're now moving up closer to the middle of the group of comparables. There are clearly other municipalities here in Grey County that have lower development charge rates to reflect their different services and the different decisions of council. When we go to the non-residential, we're seeing a much sharper shift here. You can see that your current rates are sort of down in that bottom part of the middle range, and the newly calculated would push you up sort of at the top end of the what I'll call the direct comparators. And then you can see that in Blue Mountains and also in Barrie, there's very significant non-residential charges. This is just a function of the way that these get calculated and determined in other jurisdictions. And you can see the banding is fairly tight within that group. However, we recognize that as a sharp increase amongst the comparators. And then just wrapping up my presentation, I just want to cover off next steps and where we've been. So the background study itself was released back in July. We had the council information on July 22nd, and then we held 2 open house sessions here in Meaford on August 27th. I would say that they were well attended, especially the evening one, and we had a very good dialogue during that. And it was excellent to hear from some from the development industry and those in general. So those were very good sessions. And I would note that's well above and beyond what's required under the legislation. And we're having the formal public meeting this evening. As the mayor indicated in the initial, any comments that we received tonight, we will certainly take those into consideration. If other points are raised, we have the opportunity to make any necessary adjustments to the calculations, and we look forward to bringing back a bylaw for council's consideration on or about October the 7th. So Mayor, that's the end of my formal presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Binning. We have 3 people who have registered to speak tonight. All of them represent the Loon Call development. And we have Sharef Singh is going to be online. And then we have Bob List and Angus Knowles. So who would like to speak first? And if you'll just turn on the microphone for, there we are. There you go.
There we go. Thanks.
Would you just identify yourself by name? Thanks.
I'll have to look at myself. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. My name is Bob List, L-I-S-T. My address is 103 South Bank Drive. That's one word, in Bracebridge, Ontario. P is in Papa, 1 L is in Lima, 1 G is in Golf, 3. I'm a land use planner. I've been engaged to provide services to the Loon Call group of companies for the past 15 years. And I'm trying to retire, but it's just not happening. And I see from other people with the same color hair I have that it's not working for them either. I've been around a long time with respect to the issue of development charges, or whatever they were called prior to the legislation calling them development charges. Before that, they were known as impost fees, and before that, there was nothing. The reason that development charges legislation was put into place has been forgotten. The Development Charges Act was primarily envisaged as a mechanism to permit development to leapfrog the end of existing services. You won't find that mentioned in any of the background studies that I've seen prepared by consultants in the last 15 years. And yet, that was the driving force. Now, development charges bylaws are related primarily to assessing the costs or the believed costs of new development on capital expenditures of the municipality. Hemson, in its previous presentations in other municipalities in Ontario, has said that growth should pay for growth and that development should pay for growth. That's never been the issue, ever. Development has always paid for growth. The issue is, how does development pay for growth? And what the narrow focus is under the Development Charges Act is that the Development Charges Act should provide the solitary, as I believe it's Mr. Benning. Mr. Benning indicated, he used the word the prime mechanism for raising of monies to cover these capital expenses. And I would suggest to you that that's not correct. It's one of the available mechanisms, but as you know, the existing taxpayers of your municipality will contribute towards improvements to your works through something else called property taxes and the general levy. It's my position that municipalities should go back and review the application, the general application outside of the parameters of the Development Charges Act and take into account properly what those loose ends do to raise the cost of development charges beyond the cost of reason. There was a recent paper that was produced in October 2021 out of the University of Western Ontario called Reassessing the Case for Development Charges in Canadian Municipalities by Andrew Sanction of the Centre for Urban Policy and Local Governments. Every municipal council in the province of Ontario should read that and understand it and see what the options actually are. You won't get them in your development charges study. They're not there, they're not examined, they're not even identified. So what I'm recommending to you is that you put a pause on where you were at until such time as you have an opportunity to read that and perhaps chat with some people who are knowledgeable about the other side of the fence outside the current legislation of things that municipalities should take into account. Sorry if I speak with a little bit of passion. The Government of Canada and indeed the province of Ontario have recently identified that development charges significantly, is the word that they use, raise the cost of housing. And yet we hear all the time about what is it that we can do to reduce the cost of housing. If you want to sit down with our group of companies and others that I know that are in the same boat, we can identify cost savings across the province of Ontario that can be made to the tune of roughly $15,000 for every house built. If a few things were changed, it wouldn't even require legislative alterations, just policy direction from the province of Ontario primarily. And in some municipalities, the cost savings would be $50,000 per unit. Nobody has sat down to talk to anybody about these things from people that actually build things and put them in the ground, like the Loon Call group of companies do. So I invite you to invite us to explain that to you and how these savings can be made. We're trying in this municipality to deliver a product at a price that no one else in the province of Ontario can deliver. No one at this scale, no one. And we're being successful in achieving that. We've done it in Bracebridge, we've done it in Gravenhurst, and we've done it in other communities in Ontario and continue to do it. We want to continue to do it, but the reach out to us has been insignificant and it needs to change. With respect to Hemson, I've been involved with other municipalities where this consulting company has presented very similar formats of what they presented to you. 5 years ago, this company, not Mr. Binning, but this company proposed to the district municipality of Muskoka that the 2024 development charge for district services, which are sewer, water, and district roads, it's a two-tier system there. That charge in 2024 should be $35,000 per single family dwelling unit. This time through, Hemson was not selected to do the work for the district municipality of Muskoka, but Watson and Associates was. Watson and Associates released their report and their recommendation for bylaw about 6 weeks ago in the district municipality of Muskoka. And the development charge proposed for the same works for 2025, 1 year later on, was $22,000. A difference of $13,000 per door. And I ask you What kind of examination has been done by the municipalities to review the subjectiveness of some of the assumptions that are made in the development charges reviews that are undertaken? And that's proof in the pudding from another consultant details all this material, that these costs are excessive and very subjective. And you should not buy into the theory that you should go for maximum development charge, which is what Hempson always does. And they state it and they've said it in writing. They recommend the maximum every time. You don't need to do that. The comparables chart, which is just shown, is another little, what I call inappropriate use of information before municipal councils. More than 50% of the municipalities in Ontario don't have any development charges, none. You won't see Hempson say that to you. They don't. What do those municipalities do when their infrastructure needs to be improved? That should be explained, and the benefits of that should be explained, and the opportunities to explore that should be explained. It's not. And I believe that it should be. To relate the town of Meaford in its current state and what's proposed over the next 10-year period to that of the town of Blue Mountain or the city of Barrie is inappropriate. You are not either one of those and hopefully never will be. Hempson does not identify options for the imposition of development charges or variable rates either in any of the background material that they've provided. I'm almost done here. Rather, they just give you some facts that they or some information that they believe is appropriate, but they don't offer to you things like how you could come up with a variable development charge rate based upon dwelling unit size, market value, or sales prices. They don't even mention it in their background material. Nowhere. How do they deal with the exceptions that the province of Ontario have recently levied upon you as a council? You can't charge a development charge for a secondary dwelling unit, nor can you charge a development charge for a tertiary dwelling unit. And yet those units are going to put a demand on the system. There's no explanation for that other than, well, the province told us we can't do it, but you're still going to have to pay for the demand that comes from that. There's no examination of that in the development charges report. And most importantly, that affects the group of companies that I represent, is that there are no exceptions for attainable housing. That's private sector constructed quality housing to address the person per unit, which I believe are incorrect as stated by Hempson. We've mentioned this for decades to them and they just don't listen. But exceptions for attainable housing should be undertaken and reviewed by this municipal council. You've got a developer in this municipality that's trying to deliver that. What are you doing to assist in the delivery of those attainable housing units? It's okay to talk about affordable housing. It's okay to talk about social housing. These things are assisted by government. But the next step when people want to leave those things is a low-cost private sector dwelling unit. The government isn't involved for the most part. That's what we deliver. It's called attainable housing. You need to increase that supply to provide the step that's necessary for people to get into the regular housing market is what I'm going to call it. And the only way we'll deal with this issue of housing is to increase supply. Increase supply. What can we do to do that? We'd love to explore that with you. And I'll leave my comments at that and Angus can carry on from here. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Are you speaking next?
Yes.
And you are Angus Knowles.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Council. As I mentioned, I'm Angus Knowles. I'm a development manager for LC Development Group, also known as Loon Call. I work with Bob and Suresh, and in particular, I'm working on the Gates of Meaford subdivision, just on Highway 26 on the way out to Owen Sound. So picking up on where Bob left off, I wanted to spend my time this evening talking to you a little bit about what we're doing, what we've had success with in other municipalities, and ultimately what we need from council and Meaford to continue what we'd like to do here in the future. And we're speaking to you today at the DC background study public meeting. But what we have found, and it's not unique to Meaford, is that there has tended to be what we perceive as a gap in the way councils look at their budget, their asset management plan, the DC background report. And there tends to be what I would call a blind spot with respect to the creative ways that council can raise money for infrastructure in a growth pays for growth manner, but that has the nuance to identify types of growth that are happening in their community that are unique, that are beneficial to the community, and that require some additional support. And it may not be appropriate that that type of development or growth is paying the same rate, say, as a waterfront second home or something like that. And I say that's not unique because we see it in other municipalities. And I think we see it because what we're doing is unique. We in Muskoka, so Bracebridge and Gravenhurst, we have a project in Grey Highlands. We've been successful at delivering hundreds of attainable ownership houses. And part of why we're able to do what we do there is support from the local municipalities, specifically around development charges. So using the Gates of Meaford project as an example, prior to this meeting, I worked with the Lakeland Association of Realtors and just looked up the average resale price of a home in Meaford for non-waterfront homes. And that price year to date is $670,319. Now, our first phase, the project is 201 homes, give or take. Our first phase of townhomes that we're building there now is 38 townhomes. We've sold most of those, and the average price for those townhomes that we've sold so far is right around $400,000. And I'm sure many of you have seen the construction is coming along. We have some recent closings there in July and August. Of those homes that have closed, those townhomes, the average price was less than $350,000. So what we're doing is very unique. It's a different approach to growth pays for growth. And it's a naturally occurring form of attainable ownership housing that's happening in this community that we would like to continue to deliver. And what does the support that we need look like? I would point to the town of Bracebridge. We recently worked with them on their development charge bylaw, and Suresh and Bob have worked with councils there and the district for many, many years. The most recent bylaw in Bracebridge, we developed with staff a framework that set price thresholds for different housing types, ownership housing. So it would focus on townhomes and single detached homes for us. And we would set a threshold. So for example, a townhome that's sold for $415,000 or less would be exempt from development charges. A townhome that's sold from $415,000 to $450,000, 50% development charges would apply to that home. And the way that is confirmed is at the transfer of the property. So after occupancy, we have the land transfer between ourselves and the end user. That is provided as evidence to the municipality as to what that home was sold to. And based on that, the DC waiver or partial waiver is applied. And in Bracebridge, we have a subdivision that we've recently finished. Of the townhomes in that subdivision, 77% of them qualified for the DC rebate program that was in place at that time. For single family homes in Bracebridge under their current bylaw that we worked with them on, a single detached home that is sold for $570,000 or less, zero development charges would apply. For $570,000 to $615,000, 50% development charge would apply. And what our role in that process was was to work very closely with staff and the consultant to provide on-the-ground information with respect to what our costs are to develop and construct those homes, what we see in the market as being value add attainable housing, what we can deliver those homes for and what we can sell them for, and setting those thresholds at levels that help us deliver those homes in the projects that we're working on now, and ideally in a way that can be revisited by council each year to help us do that in the future. So my request to you this evening would be not so much the DC background report. I understand the terms of reference for that are typically quite detailed in the analysis of what the maximum charge can be. What I would ask is that council direct staff and the consultant to work with us between now and when a DC bylaw comes to council for consideration to develop a similar type of framework that could apply to the Gates of Meaford subdivision and allow us to continue the attainable ownership component in the future phase and into future projects as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Now, I think, Suresh, are you hearing us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, you need to speak up probably a bit.
Oh, okay. How's that?
That's better. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll put my hand over my mic a bit here so you can hear me. Truth be told, I'm a little shell-shocked by the numbers that I saw today. And you know, I know council and some staff are aware of what we do, and thank you, Bob and Angus, for addressing council on those various items. To give you a little bit of perspective, you know, we make promises that we keep, and one of them was that we would be building and selling homes and serving the people who live and work in Meaford and the greater area. And we went as far as when we started our development, taking individual homes and reducing the price for people who have lived in and worked in, have worked in the community for certain periods of time. And those homes sold for about $285,000. And the very first person that moved in at that level.
Well,
Oh.
we lost the most of what you just said there, Suresh.
Oh,
If you could-
gosh, I'm sorry. I was just speaking to the house price of the very first home that moved in at our project on Highway 26, and it was $285,000, and that's because we made a commitment to the municipality that we would do our best to serve the people who actually have lived and worked in the community for extended periods of time. And I walked through a couple of our homes with some of council and members a few weeks ago, and they were quite impressed with what we do. And one of the big questions that I was asked is, will you keep going? Will you keep doing this? And not just on this project, but future projects. My answer was absolutely yes. And that still is our intention, 100%. But there are two things that we need help on. I'm not going to address the things that Angus and Bob addressed. I fully agree with them on that. But the two things that we always need are number one is an expeditious process, which on a reasonable level we got. Number two, and I should say 1B, is that where the municipality can help with respect to reducing costs that are paid to them, we need you to do that because we pass those savings on. What I'm asking is for council to send staff and a couple of members of council back with us to help develop a schedule that allows for reductions in DCs based on the price of a home, the type of home, the size of a home. Similar to what they did in Bracebridge for us over many years, similar to what they did in Gravenhurst with us for many years. We built 64 townhomes, again, attainable ownership in Jasper National Park, and the local municipality waived all they called them levies, all levies for that particular project. We have a long track record of doing as we say and saying as we do. So all I can ask for right now is we will put our hand out and ask council to very specifically have some key members of staff and then a couple of key members on council join us to try to figure out how we can get some help to specifically target our developments if we are successful in selling the homes and delivering the homes for the prices that we promise, and how we can do that and how the municipality can participate in reducing our costs as opposed to adding to them. That's my request.
Thank you, Shiraz.
Thank you.
Are we, can council ask any questions? Do councilors have questions of any of the speakers? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Worship. And I do have a question of Mr. List, if I may. Could you tell me again, sir, the first report that you suggested we have a look at that was produced in 2021?
Reference. The title of it is. Sorry, the title of it is Reassessing the Case for Development Charges in Canadian Municipalities, written by Andrew. It's published, I believe, by the university, and it's dated October 2021. And as I mentioned, it suggests strongly that there are alternatives to development charges. This may be a greater issue for you to examine as the years come on, as opposed to the immediacy of what you're looking at now. So Suresh is saying, look, we want to continue to provide attainable housing. We're doing what we can. We're asking the municipality to do more than what, or at least identify, because the report doesn't identify it. What typically happens in these meetings is that the consultant says, well, the province of Ontario has yet to define what attainable housing is, and therefore we're not going to touch it. We say, well, that's nice. That's number one, it's hiding from the reality that we're living in currently. And number two, none of us expects the province of Ontario will be able to come up with a definition of attainable housing for every municipality in the province of Ontario. It's a threshold that has to be recognized and identified per area that you're looking at. As Angus said, the prices are different, the market values are different all over the place. Province isn't going to come up with those. They may come up with a suggested formula to work towards those, but we're suggesting to you, you don't need those. We can supply that data with you. Your staff can assist us in confirming that data.
If I may follow
Yep.
up, your wishes. Thank you, Mr. List. And I agree, the province has had a difficult enough time defining affordable housing, let alone, any thoughts of a definition on attainable housing. And I would just ask Mr. Singh, if you're still listening, to allow council and staff an opportunity to discuss your request. And if I may suggest that we will get back to you on that, but I appreciate your suggestion and your desire to continue to build attainable housing in Meaford. I did have the privilege of touring the sites, and I was duly impressed with the workmanship and the layouts and the offerings that you're bringing to Meaford. So please allow us to discuss your request.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Councillor Bartley?
Thank you, Mayor Kentner. So, Mr. List, you mentioned there's 50% of the municipalities don't charge DC charges. Would they be Northern Ontario municipalities that do not have sewer and water? Would you supply a list of them so I can check that out? Because if we're facing $109 million water plant or water treatment plant, if new development's not going to pay for it, who is?
The answer to the first part of the question is yes, most of the municipalities are in central or northern Ontario. But there are examples of communities that are similar to Meaford. For example, the town of Parry Sound. There are towns in the Kawarthas and so on. They're never referenced. And all these places have sewer and water. And some of them that should be referenced further is when they do have development charges, their rates are exceptionally low. But you don't ever see that in the background material. You see the references, and it's not always the town of Blue Mountain or the city of Barrie, but you see these other places that just don't relate. Second part of the question, sorry, was.
Sorry, if new development is not going to pay for a $109 million plant, who is? I'm not going to be paying for it. I don't need it.
Prior to development charges coming into effect, municipalities used to bear the burden of the cost of those shared through a grant structure system with the province of Ontario. What that does is distribute the cost, whatever that cost is, over the entire benefiting component of the population. And that's what the study that I referenced to you talks about. Because there are too many exceptions and too many areas that don't get picked up in development charges. And so the proposal is that we should go back and review that amongst other options to see if they are in fact viable to raise those capital expenditures that you're talking about, because they're real. They're not going away. We all have to face them. So that's the answer to the question is there are other options that we need to explore to see if they are better. But development charges by themselves won't do that. And they're not accurate. That's why I gave the example of the district municipality of Muskoka. You know, there was a question at the public meeting in the district where one of the councillors, after it had been stated that the new recommended charge was $22,000 instead of what was previously proposed at $35,000, said, so how much money did we lose because we discounted to 50% on our development charges previously? That was a realistic question if it had been put in the proper context of, and also with respect to what we have overcharged in the interim period, which wasn't there. And so part of the problem with development charges is coming to grip with the fact that there's a lot of things that are in the development charges list that are pretty iffy in terms of whether or not they should or shouldn't be done or even identified as capital projects. And you'll never get over that. You know, a little intersection here, a little intersection there, all these things add up. But is that something that should be covered in the general levy? Or is that something that should be covered in the development charge itself? And that's where the examination of this paper that I've suggested takes us to. It lays out options for examining different alternatives.
Any other questions? Councillor Greenfield?
Thanks, thanks, Your Worship, and thanks to all you gentlemen for your presentations, for your information. I have to admit there was some from the good folks representing Loon Call that I wasn't aware of, and I appreciate learning that. One of the questions I did have for Mr. Binning later in the agenda was about not accepting the maximum. And I think, Mr. List, you advised that we weren't obligated to, that perhaps council could suggest their own number. I hope I interpreting that correctly. I want to go to your idea of some council members and some staff members sitting down with the Loon Call folks and talking about establishment of prices. And I can see some value of that. I guess I can't help but thinking, okay, if we do that with the Loon Call subdivision, then wouldn't we be obligated to do that with the bay bounds across the highway from you, or Skydev down at the harbor? And then I got thinking, is Skydev, because it is right on Georgian Bay waterfront, does that put it in a different category than, say, Loon Call, which was basically in a farmer's field? And I just wondering if this could get us into a lot of difficulty in the future. I certainly hear what you're saying, and yeah, that's it's great and I like that, the word attainable, but I'm not sure if our municipality is in a position to undertake something like what you're suggesting. Not again, if we do it with Loon Call, I think we're opening the door for every proposal we've got on our plate, and that wouldn't be very time effective, I'm afraid. We want to move housing projects ahead as expeditiously as possible. And I don't want to, I'm just thinking there might be delays created by doing what you're suggesting.
Did you wish to answer that?
We at Loon Call don't believe in the municipalities that we operate that there's anybody that even comes close to being able to meet the thresholds that the municipality and we develop. Not even close. If we work with you, you'll see that right away. Notwithstanding that, the issue here in providing housing at lower costs than market value housing is to increase the supply. If somebody else named Suresh 2 comes along and can do what this company does, then this is good for the municipality and everyone. And if that assistance that the municipality provides to Loon Call, it should be available to somebody else that can meet those same thresholds. But right now, there's nobody that can meet these thresholds. Nobody.
I'd like to hear from Councillor Uhrig. Put your microphone on.
Would we be able to have Suresh just provide a quick comment on Councillor Greenfield's question?
Are you there, Suresh?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just to address that, what we're proposing and what we're doing in Bracebridge right now and other municipalities, it's performance based. The builder or developer would have to commit to and meet those price thresholds. Exactly what Bob said. There's likely a 0% chance that anyone else is doing it. So I can tell you, in the district of Muskoka, from 2010 to 2024, there were exactly 2 homes that qualified for the reduction in DC that were not built by us. There are hundreds of them that were built by us. This is a very, very, very simple and appropriate way of getting the attainable ownership housing piece into the municipality. Simple question to the other builder or developer is, can you meet the threshold? They'll say no, and they'll move on.
Councillor Uhrig, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I was going to say, and I agree with Suresh that I think Mr. Knowles already explained that yeah, you have to meet the threshold. So otherwise, that isn't relevant anyway. My question is, and thank you, Councillor Porter, because of course you already found the article that Mr. List was referring to. Just glancing through it, I guess my one question is, and I'm very curious to read it, looking at just some of the references that it relates to and seeing that the report is obviously done in 2021. We have to bring up the C word. COVID is obviously a big element of everything that happens, and particularly a lot of the price increases that have happened. So my question is, this study, does it take into account, is it relevant as much post-COVID? I will defend what you're saying because in very real terms, Suresh and yourselves are obviously meeting thresholds of attainable. So somehow you're figuring a way post-COVID to do it, but I'm just wondering whether there's any relevance to this with that.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, please. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to consider materials that weren't on the public agenda, including this study that is now being brought up. So I think we should
Okay.
just sort of pivot back to today's meeting, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Binning. If he has an answer, I'm just curious. I'm sure this is perhaps, not, the kind of information you expected to come out of the questions, but how open would your organization be to the idea of some what was the term that was used in other words, some charges would be variable, I guess, based on certain criteria. Is that a practical thing from your standpoint?
Yes, I mean, I won't respond to all of the suggestions about our work and such. I think it's important to note that the background study has been available since mid-July. And we've had additional public information sessions. And this is the first that we've heard of any concerns. There were suggestions here that we've got the PPU wrong. There's suggestions that we've got project costs that aren't appropriate. And if there's a technical submission coming, that would be very much appreciated and we would examine it. This notion of there being a multitude of funding tools available is just not accurate. If you don't fund it through development charges or other kinds of development fees, you have two sources of funding for these works. You've got the property tax base and your utility rates. And when we had our public information session or my session with you, council, I indicated that we were calculating the maximum permissible rates, but council had implementation options available to them. And I talked to you about what that means. So to suggest that we didn't provide that information is inaccurate. And so there's a very important thing to recognize here. Under the Development Charges Act, it's what's referred to as a benefits received model, remembering that the bylaws can be challenged to the tribunal. That means that we have to treat a person as a person as a person, whether they're living in a $400,000 home or a $1.5 million home, because they place the same demand on services. We can't differentiate the development charge by the value of the unit. The mechanism that they are asking for and talking about, creating these thresholds, is just as was suggested. It would be an exemption or a discount. We can't shift that burden to the more expensive homes or the homes on the waterfront. That's not permitted under the legislation. So any discounting or exempting that occurs, that foregone revenue has to be funded from property taxes or your utility rates. But that's completely at your discretion as council to add additional exemptions and discounts that are not already in the Development Charges Act. Just like the reference to the secondary suites, they are fully considered under the calculation of the Development Charges Act. That's an automatic exemption. When those come along, you don't collect the DCs, but they've been used in calculating the rates, and you have to offset that from property taxes and utility rates. So the exemptions and discounts that are already there place fiscal obligations upon the rest of the ratepayers in this municipality. So just again, and if there's other questions, I completely agree that council has its discretion to implement a rate lower than what we've set in the development charge background study. I would say you can't do it higher and you can't shift the burden to other users, but you can you can phase it in. You can create these thresholds for these different types of units as long as it's understood that there's a fiscal consequence to the balance of your ratepayers from doing that.
So if I can just paraphrase, I think this has a lot to do with how interested we are as a municipality in creating more attainable housing.
That's correct. Yes, and there's reasons for that. And the province has said they're going to do something. I agree. We don't know when that's going to happen. I don't see any reason why they couldn't do it municipality by municipality, just like they did with the affordable. And they have done inducements for purpose-built rental, which is a very important segment of the market that's been underserved for a long time. So they are doing things, and there's things built in there, but you have full discretion to do additional things.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? I'd like to get council questions here. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on the report that we had before us, I just want to refresh our minds that we have a very large municipality and it's not all everything being built in the town. So in the report was about $17,000 to build a home for DC charges in a rural community. And it was about $45,000 on the interior of the town itself. So when you look at a home that's being built in a rural community, you know, $45,000 puts in your septic and drills your well. So to have a builder come along and say, you know, you're onto water and sewer for those costings. We get reports here from our building department of some of the fees that's been charged recently just to put in a septic system. And they have been rising a lot. So when a builder is thinking about someone somewhere, we do have those two numbers. And I think I'm accurate on that in your report, about 17,000 in the rural area. And I think I'm close at 45 in town. So when I look at that, I mean, they are using a service, but in my case, I have ongoing maintenance costs too for my well and for my septic. So it's never ending for me, but my lifestyle and my life choice was in the rural community. And so those in town, they get guaranteed water, the very best. And anyway, that's only my point, the rural and the urban.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Mr. Binning, these questions are for you, if I may. The first one, since you were last before council, we've had a report at Grey County that suggested the new Minister of Finance's growth projection numbers. And we don't have a breakdown for Meaford, but for the county, 42,869 versus your report of 23,810. So I'm just wondering if you feel there's a need to revisit those growth projection numbers, or if you're very comfortable with what you have worked with in this particular study, allowing an opportunity to give or take a little bit as we progress through the years and determine if the 63 units per year is accurate, or if that number needs to be reassessed.
Yes, through to the Deputy Mayor. It's a very good question, and I tried to address it a bit in my presentation. We've been very careful, especially when we look at the engineered services like the sewage plant, to make sure that what we were doing is attributing based on capacity, the needs arising from those 635 units. If we doubled the forecast and said there were going to be 1,200 units, I would move more costs in because we put a lot of costs out to benefit growth beyond 2033. If you have a faster rate of growth, then we would pull in more of those costs and the rate would be largely unchanged. So we've been very cautious about the way we've examined the allocation of costs based on the amount of development that we've projected.
Thank you. And just one other quick question, because I assume it's an error. Page 16 of the report, the rate comparison residential. You have Meaford listed at 54,883. Am I missing something or is that an error?
That includes the county charge
Okay,
as well
that includes the county charge.
and the school
Okay,
board, and if applicable. No, there's no school charge here, but it includes the county.
thank you.
Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to start, Tony, your 45,000 on a septic and well doesn't cut it anymore. It's double that. Sorry. To like I asked earlier, if the new development is not going to pay for the new sewage plant, and we probably wouldn't even be talking about this figure if it wasn't for the sewage plant. Who's going to pay for it? Mr. List? You mentioned there's other ways to pay for it. I don't need the answer now, but in the next week, I'd like a report on where do we come up with that funding, please. You mentioned Perry Sound doesn't have any development charges. I've got the BMA report in front of me. Perry Sound's taxes are 30% higher than Meaford's. They don't need development charges. They're charging it in the tax rate. I don't want to add 30% to my residents that live here now. But if you could supply me with a list of how we fund this, other than, and don't get me wrong, attainable housing, I'm all for it. And if I can help you, you tell me how to fund it going forward. I had a developer stand at that mic a couple of years ago, wanted us to reduce the development charges we have now so he could build houses. I asked the man, if I drop $10,000 off the development charges, is it going into the reduced price of the house or into your pocket? He wouldn't answer me that. Can you tell me if we took 15,000 off the price of a house, it's going into the lower cost of that house, not your pocket? Can you assure me of that?
Suresh is here and he can confirm what I'm about to tell you. And the answer to that is yes. It's a direct relationship. Whatever the saving is on the development charge is passed along to the homeowner directly in a savings.
That's the answer I wanted, and I appreciate that. And
It's not common, and I understand clearly what you were saying.
yeah,
But in our case, that's how it works.
and like I said, I don't need the answer now, but if you could tell the rest of us how to fund this without charging it on development charges, I'd like to know that as soon as I can get it.
Councillor Greenfield.
Thanks, Your Worship. I do have a couple of questions of Mr. Benning concerning his report, if I may. On page 12 of 20, 9.5 and then into 9.6, it talks about the municipality may enter into an agreement for all GCs or any part to be paid after it would otherwise be payable. And then it goes on to say that I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, that at least some of those charges could be paid on the tax roll. Am I reading that correctly? I'm curious about that. It starts page 12 of 20, 9.5 and 9.6. It's under phasing, timing of calculation and payment.
Apologies, Mayor, through you. I'm not sure which document's being referred to in the page number.
This is what I've got on our agenda today. So it's on the bylaw.
Oh, the bylaw.
Part of it. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Apologies, I don't have the bylaw in front of me. The Development Charges Act allows municipalities to enter into an agreement with the developer for the payment of the development charges at a time other than the issuance of the building permit, either earlier or later. That doesn't typically apply to shifting the burden onto the rate base though, or onto the property tax base. That's just changing the timing of collection.
No, I'm not suggesting it does. What I really wondered was, okay, if it can be put on the tax roll, or part of it can be put on the tax roll, is there a yearly how many years? Can you do this for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years? Is the reinterest charged, commonly?
Apologies. So this, if a development charge is not paid, then it can be added to the tax roll. There's that authority under the act. And it's just added to the tax roll. I'm not sure. And so it's just if there's any additional procedures after that. But I mean, you wouldn't typically issue the building permit without collecting the development charges.
No, okay. To me, it seemed like not a great deal for the municipality. I mean, to me, the idea of development charges is to get some monies in to help pay for the development. The other question I had, if I may, Your Worship, was under number here again, number 15 on our agenda, and the redevelopment of lands. It talks about. This should be an easy one. If there is an existing residence on a property, and if for some reason, whether the residence is getting decrepit, is getting beyond its normal lifespan, the owner decides to, hey, we're going to demolish it and we're going to rebuild. How does that work? You're doing away with one home, you're building another. Is it just simply a matter of fact, hey, you're building a new residence and there's going to be DCs on it, or is there some kind of a bit of a trade-off there, or does that go from municipality to municipality, or is that a provincial?
The way the legislation reads is that you're intended or required to have rules in your bylaw about the redevelopment of land. And what happens, and I can't remember the time frame here, but if someone demolishes a single detached home and then builds a new single detached home, they would effectively get a credit for the existing use. And so there would be no development charge payable, but they have to redevelop within 5 years of demolishing the unit. And that's a pretty standard time frame.
Anything to add to that?
Through you, Mayor Kenner, we're following the same rules that the county do. So the county also don't charge development charges at that same 5 years.
Do we have any further questions? Deputy Mayor?
Your Worship, just one if I may. Mr. Benning, is it a provincial requirement, I'll say, that development charges can only be used for capital costs?
The short answer is yes.
Yes, that's what I thought. So the answer to my further question will be no, so I'll just speak to you afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, I think that, thank you, Ms. Benning. I think that brings us to the end of our agenda, and I think that we've heard, lots of input from those who registered to speak. Thank you very much for your participation. So I'll entertain a motion to move out of committee of the whole, moved by Councillor Bell and seconded by Councillor Bartley. All in favor? And at this point in time, I think I can adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.